If you open that door tonight, your life will never be the same. Vanessa Brooks didn't know why those words echoed inside her mind as she stood frozen in the middle of her tiny apartment at 3:12 in the morning, staring at the shadow beneath her front door. Outside, cold rain slammed against the fire escape hard enough to rattle the old window beside her bed. The entire building groaned softly around her, pipes knocking somewhere deep in the walls like tired bones shifting in their sleep. Vanessa had just returned home from another 14-hour shift cleaning luxury suites at the Blackstone Grand Hotel downtown. Her feet ached. Her wrists burned from bleach and hot water. The scent of industrial cleaner still clung to her faded gray hoodie, even after the subway ride home. Her apartment was barely bigger than a hotel bedroom. A twin mattress sat against the wall beneath a flickering lamp with a crooked shade. A small hot plate rested beside the sink. Instant ramen steamed quietly in a chipped bowl on the counter, filling the room with the salty smell of broth and garlic powder. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And in a city like Chicago, sometimes survival itself felt luxurious. Then came the knock. Not loud, not desperate, just 3 slow taps against the door. Vanessa's stomach tightened instantly. Nobody visited apartment 4B after midnight unless they brought trouble with them. She moved carefully toward the peephole, her sock-covered feet silent against the cracked linoleum floor. The hallway light outside flickered weakly, casting long yellow shadows over stained wallpaper and rusted pipes. At first, all she saw was darkness. Then the figure shifted. A tall man leaned heavily against the wall beside her door, one hand pressed tightly against his ribs beneath a rain-soaked black coat. Water dripped steadily from his dark hair onto the hallway floor. Even exhausted, he looked expensive. Tailored coat, polished shoes splattered with rainwater, gold watch half hidden beneath his sleeve. The kind of man who belonged inside private elevators and penthouse lounges, not standing outside broken apartments on the south side at 3 in the morning. Vanessa's breath caught when she saw his face clearly. Adrian Park. The name moved through Chicago like a whisper people were afraid to say too loudly. Owner of luxury casinos. Investor in half the downtown skyline. Rumored king of an underground empire nobody could fully prove existed. Men in $1,000 suits followed him through velvet clubs glowing gold beneath crystal chandeliers. Women lowered their eyes when he walked past. And now he stood outside her apartment looking pale enough to collapse. Another sound echoed through the stairwell downstairs. Footsteps. Several of them. Calm. Controlled. Getting closer. Adrian lifted his head slowly toward her door. His expression remained cold despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Dangerous men didn't stop being dangerous just because they were tired. "Please," he said quietly, his voice rough like gravel dragged across concrete. "Don't let them see me." Vanessa's pulse hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to lock the door and stay silent. Women like Vanessa survived by avoiding men like Adrian Park. At the hotel, she spent entire nights becoming invisible to powerful people. She cleaned around diamond watches left carelessly on marble counters. She listened quietly while wealthy guests discussed million-dollar deals over champagne she could never afford. People like Adrian lived in another universe entirely. But then she noticed something strange. His hand was shaking. Barely. Almost invisible beneath the sleeve of his black coat. Fear. Not weakness. Not pain. Fear. Before Vanessa could think, voices echoed from the lower hallway. "Check every floor." Adrian closed his eyes briefly as if he already knew what came next. Vanessa stared at the tiny apartment behind her. One room. One weak lock. One frightened woman who had absolutely no business getting involved with a man like him. Then she unlocked the door. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief for several long seconds before finally grabbing the bowl from the counter and placing it carefully on the small folding table near the mattress. "It is just instant noodles," she said quietly. "Do not expect luxury." Adrian sat down slowly in the only chair the apartment had, his movements controlled despite the exhaustion pulling at his face. Up close, he no longer looked untouchable. Rain had softened the sharp perfection people usually saw in magazines and whispered stories. Without the black coat and polished confidence surrounding him, Adrian Park suddenly looked like a man carrying too much weight alone. Vanessa remained standing near the stove, arms crossed tightly over herself as she watched him with cautious eyes. She still could not believe this was real. Men like Adrian belonged behind tinted windows and private security doors, not inside tiny apartments where the ceiling leaked whenever it stormed too hard. Adrian picked up the plastic fork beside the bowl and paused for half a second as steam curled into the cold air between them. "When was the last time you slept?" Vanessa asked before she could stop herself. Adrian glanced at her briefly. "I do not remember." His answer unsettled her more than she expected. Outside, another wave of rain hit the windows hard enough to make the thin glass tremble. The old radiator hissed unevenly beside the bed, filling the room with dry heat that smelled faintly like rust. Somewhere upstairs, a baby started crying. Somewhere downstairs, a television blasted muffled game show laughter through paper-thin walls. Apartment 4B was full of ordinary sounds. Human sounds. The kind Adrian probably had not heard in years. He took one careful bite of noodles and went completely still. Vanessa frowned slightly. "What?" Adrian stared down at the cheap meal in silence before speaking quietly. "Nobody has cooked for me in a very long time." The words landed strangely in the tiny room. Not dramatic. Not self-pitying. Just honest. Vanessa looked away first. She knew loneliness when she heard it. At the hotel, she spent entire shifts invisible to wealthy guests wrapped in designer coats and diamond jewelry. Sometimes she listened to executives argue over million-dollar deals, while she scrubbed wine stains from marble bathroom counters, worth more than her yearly salary. Nobody looked directly at her unless something needed cleaning. "You should sleep," she said softly. "You look terrible." Adrian almost smiled at that. Almost. The expression disappeared before it fully formed. "People usually do not speak to me that way." Vanessa shrugged lightly. "People are usually afraid of you." Adrian lowered his eyes toward the bowl again. "And you are not?" Vanessa hesitated. The truth sat heavy inside her chest. She was afraid. Terrified, actually. Afraid of the men searching the building. Afraid of what would happen if anyone discovered Adrian inside apartment 4B. Afraid that one terrible decision tonight could destroy the fragile little life she had spent years trying to hold together. But strangely, she was beginning to fear something else too. The look in Adrian's eyes whenever he forgot to hide how exhausted he really was. "I think," she said carefully, "you are more dangerous when you stop pretending you are not tired." Adrian looked at her differently after that. Not softer. Not warmer. Just surprised. Like nobody had spoken honestly to him in years. Silence settled between them again as rain streaked across the dark Chicago skyline outside the window. Then suddenly Adrian stiffened. Every muscle in his body tightened instantly. Vanessa heard it a second later too. Footsteps stopping outside apartment 4B. Vanessa forced herself not to look back into the apartment as the man outside studied her face carefully beneath the flickering hallway light. Rainwater glistened across the shoulders of his dark coat, and behind him stood another man near the stairwell with his hands folded calmly in front of him. Neither looked nervous. Men like that never did. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people used to walking into rooms and taking control without raising their voices. Vanessa tightened her grip on the edge of the door chain to stop her trembling hands from showing. "I think you have the wrong apartment," she said softly. The man closest to the door smiled again, but it never reached his eyes. "Maybe," he replied politely, "but our friend is important to us. We would hate for him to be uncomfortable out in this weather." Behind Vanessa, the old radiator hissed loudly enough to make her jump slightly. She prayed they had not noticed. The apartment suddenly felt unbearably exposed. Every object inside seemed too visible now. The steaming bowl on the table. Adrian's black coat hanging over the chair near the window. The second pair of wet footprints near the door she had not noticed before. The man's eyes drifted downward briefly, and Vanessa felt panic tighten inside her chest. Then suddenly a loud crash echoed somewhere farther down the hallway, followed by angry shouting from another floor. Both men turned instinctively toward the sound. "Probably Jenkins again," the second man muttered with irritation. The first man looked back at Vanessa one final time. "If you see anyone unusual tonight," he said calmly, "call this number immediately." He slipped a black business card halfway through the door opening. Vanessa accepted it carefully, trying not to let her fingers shake. Then the men walked away down the corridor with the same controlled silence they arrived with. Vanessa waited until the stairwell door slammed shut downstairs before finally closing her apartment door completely. The second the lock clicked into place, all the strength drained from her legs. She leaned heavily against the wall beside the door, breathing hard. Across the room, Adrian remained exactly where he had been standing the entire time, half hidden in shadow near the small kitchen counter. His eyes stayed fixed on the door long after the hallway went quiet. "You should not have done that," he said finally. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh that sounded more exhausted than amused. "It is a little late for that now." Adrian stepped slowly toward the window and carefully moved the curtain aside just enough to glance down at the street below. Black SUVs sat parked beside the curb beneath the glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. Expensive vehicles in a neighborhood where people usually worried about bus schedules and rent increases. Adrian lowered the curtain again. "They will keep watching the building until morning." Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. "Morning?" Adrian turned toward her. "The men outside are patient. They know eventually people get tired, hungry, frightened." His voice remained calm, but something cold moved beneath the words. "Experience." Vanessa suddenly realized this was not the first time Adrian had spent a night waiting for danger to arrive. Maybe that was why he looked so comfortable standing in tension while her own nerves felt ready to collapse. She walked toward the sink and splashed cold water against her face. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked pale beneath the weak light. 28 years old, working double shifts, sending money home to her younger brother in Milwaukee whenever she could, surviving paycheck to paycheck inside an apartment barely large enough to turn around in. And somehow tonight, her life had collided with a man whose wristwatch probably cost more than everything she owned combined. "Why here?" she asked quietly without turning around. "Out of all the places in Chicago, why this building?" For the first time since entering apartment 4B, Adrian hesitated before answering. "Because nobody ever looks twice at invisible people," he said softly. Vanessa slowly looked back at him then. And somehow, hearing those words from a man like Adrian Park unsettled her more than anything else that night. Vanessa's hand slowed slightly against the clean gauze as she looked up at Adrian across the small table. The storm outside had softened into steady rain now, the kind that turned Chicago streets silver beneath neon lights and passing headlights. Inside apartment 4B, the weak lamp beside the mattress painted everything gold and tired. Adrian sat quietly with one sleeve rolled back, his expensive black shirt wrinkled from rain and exhaustion. For the first time since entering the apartment, he no longer looked untouchable. He just looked far away. "Your mother?" Vanessa asked softly. Adrian's eyes remained lowered toward the table for several seconds before he answered. "She worked in a laundromat when I was a child." His voice had changed slightly. Quieter now. Less controlled. 6 days a week. Sometimes 7. Vanessa listened carefully while replacing the gauze over the bruise on his arm. Something about hearing a man like Adrian speak about ordinary struggles felt strange, almost unreal. Men surrounded by power usually acted like they had been born inside expensive buildings. "We lived above the laundromat," Adrian continued. "Small apartment. One room. Very loud pipes." Vanessa almost smiled faintly at that. "Sounds familiar." Adrian glanced around apartment 4B again, slower this time. The old radiator clanked loudly beside the window as if agreeing with her. "My mother hated silence," he said quietly. "She said silence made poor people think too much." Vanessa sat back slightly after securing the bandage. "Was she strict?" Adrian's expression softened for half a second beneath the warm yellow light. "Terrifying." The answer surprised a small laugh out of Vanessa before she could stop herself. The sound filled the tiny apartment unexpectedly, bright against the heaviness of the night. Adrian looked at her then, really looked at her, and something unreadable passed through his eyes. Maybe surprise. Maybe memory. Vanessa suddenly became aware of how close they were sitting in the cramped room. Close enough to hear each other breathing beneath the sound of rain tapping softly against the glass. She cleared her throat and stood quickly, carrying the first aid kit back toward the sink. "You should try to sleep for a little while," she said. "The couch pulls out." Adrian glanced toward the small love seat near the window and raised one eyebrow slightly. "That thing looks like it survived a war." "It probably has." Another almost smile touched the corner of Adrian's mouth before disappearing again. Vanessa stared for a second because the expression transformed him completely. Without the coldness, without the hard stare and expensive silence surrounding him, Adrian suddenly looked younger. Human. Dangerous still, but no longer impossible to understand. The realization unsettled her more than fear had earlier. Outside, a siren echoed faintly somewhere downtown before fading into the storm. Vanessa moved toward the small kitchen counter and poured water into the electric kettle beside the sink. "Tea?" she asked quietly. Adrian nodded once. "Thank you." The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him, as if gratitude itself was a language he rarely used. Vanessa opened a cabinet and pulled down two mismatched mugs. One had a faded cartoon sunflower on it. The other had a cracked handle carefully glued back together. Apartment 4B carried the fingerprints of survival everywhere. Nothing matched. Nothing was expensive. But everything had been repaired instead of replaced. Adrian noticed that too. "You do not throw things away easily," he observed softly. Vanessa shrugged while waiting for the kettle to heat. People who grow up with very little usually do not. Silence settled comfortably for the first time all night. Not empty silence. Resting silence. Then suddenly Adrian's entire posture changed again. His eyes shifted sharply toward the window. Vanessa turned just in time to see slow-moving headlights sweep across the rain outside below. A black SUV rolled carefully past the building for the third time in less than 20 minutes. Adrian stepped toward the curtain immediately, his expression hardening back into something colder. More dangerous. Vanessa felt her stomach tighten again as the warm, quiet atmosphere inside the apartment vanished completely. Adrian stared down at the street for several long seconds before speaking without turning around. "They are not leaving anytime soon." The phone continued vibrating across the counter, loud enough to slice through the fragile calm that had settled inside apartment 4B. Vanessa stared at the screen while anxiety crawled slowly into her chest. Her manager never called employees at 4 in the morning, unless something had gone wrong. Adrian watched her carefully from the love seat, his posture immediately alert again. "You should answer it," he said quietly. Vanessa hesitated before swiping across the screen and lifting the phone to her ear. "Hello." The voice on the other end arrived sharp and impatient immediately. "Vanessa, where are you?" Mr. Holloway always sounded irritated, even during normal conversations. Tonight was worse. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. "At home, sir." "Good," he snapped quickly. "Because you are covering the morning shift." Vanessa pulled the phone slightly away from her ear in disbelief. "The morning shift starts in 2 hours. Then I suggest you start moving." Vanessa glanced toward the rain-covered windows. She had not slept. Her body still ached from the previous 14-hour shift. "Sir, I just finished working yesterday afternoon through midnight." "And?" His tone sharpened further. "Do you think the guests care whether you are tired?" Adrian lowered his tea slowly while listening from across the room. Vanessa turned slightly away from him instinctively, embarrassed by how familiar this conversation felt. "I promised my brother I would call him in the morning before his exam," she said softly. "I was hoping maybe someone else could take the breakfast floor." Mr. Holloway laughed once without humor. "Vanessa, you are a maid, not a surgeon. The hotel will survive without your emotional scheduling conflicts." The words hit harder than she wanted them to. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly across the room, though he remained silent. Vanessa stared down at the cracked linoleum beneath her feet. "Yes, sir. And wear the newer uniform tomorrow," Mr. Holloway continued. "Some guests complained your appearance looked tired yesterday." Vanessa felt heat rise into her face. She had worked 16 suites back-to-back while 2 other employees called out sick. "I understand." "Good. And Vanessa?" She swallowed quietly. "Yes. Smile more around the guests. This is a luxury hotel, not a funeral home." The line disconnected before she could answer. Silence filled the apartment again except for the steady rain outside and the soft hiss of the radiator beside the window. Vanessa slowly lowered the phone from her ear and placed it face down on the counter without speaking. For several seconds she simply stood there staring at nothing. Adrian's voice came quietly from the love seat. "He speaks to you like that often?" Vanessa forced a small shrug even though her chest felt tight. That was actually polite compared to usual. Adrian looked genuinely confused by the answer. And you tolerate it? Vanessa turned toward him with tired eyes. People with bills tolerate a lot. Adrian leaned back slowly against the worn cushions, studying her carefully beneath the warm apartment light. You work all day cleaning rooms for people who barely notice you exist. Vanessa gave a humorless smile. Welcome to hospitality. Adrian glanced around apartment 4B again. The old microwave, the patched curtains, the stack of overdue utility bills near the sink she had forgotten to hide. Something dark flickered behind his expression then. Not pity. Something closer to anger. How much do they pay you? Vanessa laughed softly in disbelief. Not enough to survive Chicago rent comfortably. Adrian remained quiet for a long moment before asking another question. Why stay? Vanessa folded her arms tightly across herself and looked toward the rain outside the window. Because jobs with health insurance are hard to find. Her voice softened slightly after that. Marcus has asthma. His medication alone costs almost $400 every month. Adrian's eyes shifted immediately toward the framed photograph beside the lamp again. Vanessa suddenly felt exposed in a way she hated. People like Adrian probably spent $400 on dinner without thinking twice. But instead of arrogance, his expression slowly hardened into something colder. More personal. Your manager knows that, does not he? Vanessa nodded once. Adrian looked down into the tea mug resting between his hands, and for the first time since entering apartment 4B, his calm mask slipped just enough for her to glimpse something dangerous beneath it. Not the cold danger from before. Something quieter. More controlled. The kind that came from watching someone powerless get humiliated for too long. Darkness swallowed apartment 4B so suddenly that Vanessa instinctively gasped. The soft hum of the refrigerator vanished. The radiator fell silent. Even the weak yellow lamp beside the mattress disappeared, leaving only the gray-blue glow of rain filtering faintly through the windows from the streetlights outside. For half a second, neither of them moved. Then Adrian stood immediately. Vanessa could hear the shift in his breathing somewhere near the love seat as he crossed the apartment in complete silence. The storm outside suddenly sounded louder without electricity filling the room. Rain hammered against the glass while distant thunder rolled low across the sleeping city. Stay away from the windows, Adrian said quietly from the darkness. His voice had changed again. Controlled. Alert. Vanessa's pulse quickened as she carefully stepped backward until her legs touched the mattress. Maybe the building lost power, she whispered. Adrian pulled the curtain aside just enough to glance toward the street below. No, Vanessa could barely make out his silhouette against the rain-streaked window. How do you know? Because the building across the street still has lights. Cold unease spread slowly through her chest. Outside, the black SUVs remained parked beneath the storm, their headlights dim beneath sheets of rain. Apartment 4B now sat completely dark while neighboring buildings continued glowing softly across the block. Adrian lowered the curtain immediately. They are testing reactions, he said quietly, watching which apartments move. Vanessa swallowed hard. The idea felt unreal. Terrifying. Like suddenly discovering her tiny forgotten apartment existed inside someone else's dangerous chess game. Adrian moved toward the kitchen counter and opened one of the drawers carefully. Vanessa heard metal shift softly inside before a faint click echoed through the darkness. What was that? She asked nervously. Flashlight. A thin beam of light appeared briefly against the ceiling before Adrian immediately pointed it downward to avoid drawing attention toward the windows. The small apartment reappeared in pale silver shadows. Vanessa sat frozen at the edge of the mattress while Adrian crossed toward the front door. His face looked sharper in the flashlight glow, every line carved by exhaustion and tension. He crouched carefully beside the door and remained perfectly still, listening. After several seconds, Vanessa heard it too. Slow footsteps somewhere farther down the hallway. Not rushed. Deliberate. Her stomach tightened instantly. Adrian stood again and turned toward her. Is there another place inside this apartment? Vanessa blinked in confusion. What? Closet. Crawl space. Maintenance access. Anything. Vanessa looked around the tiny room helplessly. There is barely enough space for me. Another sound echoed outside. a door opening somewhere nearby. Then quiet voices moving closer through the hallway. Adrian's eyes shifted immediately toward the wall behind the old bookshelf near the bathroom. What is behind that? Vanessa looked over. Nothing. Just pipes. Adrian crossed the apartment quickly and moved the bookshelf aside enough to reveal a narrow maintenance panel built into the wall. Vanessa stared in surprise. I forgot that was even there. Adrian knelt and tested the old metal latch carefully before pulling the panel open just enough to reveal a cramped utility space behind it, barely wide enough for one person. If someone enters this apartment, he said calmly, you never saw me. Vanessa's chest tightened painfully at the thought. And if they search? Adrian looked at her steadily beneath the flashlight glow. Then this becomes your last chance to walk away from all of this safely. The hallway footsteps stopped directly outside apartment 4B. Vanessa stopped breathing. 3 slow knocks echoed through the darkness. Not loud. Not aggressive. Somehow that made it worse. Adrian closed the maintenance panel halfway but did not disappear inside yet. Instead, he looked at Vanessa one final time. In the dim silver light, the feared Adrian Park no longer looked cold or untouchable. He looked tired, cornered, human. Then another knock came. Slower this time, followed by a calm voice outside the door. Miss Brooks, the man said politely, we know you are awake. The faint metallic sound from behind the hidden wall changed everything instantly. Daniel's eyes shifted past Vanessa's shoulder with razor-sharp focus, and for the first time since arriving outside apartment 4B, the calm politeness in his face cracked slightly. Not panic. Recognition. Vanessa's pulse exploded in her chest. She tightened her grip on the door instinctively, trying to block the narrow opening with her body. What was that? Daniel asked softly. Vanessa forced herself not to look back toward the bookshelf. Old pipes, she answered quickly. Daniel remained still for several seconds while rain whispered against the hallway windows behind him. Then unexpectedly he sighed. Tired. Disappointed. Miss Brooks, he said quietly. I know Adrian is inside. Hearing Adrian's first name spoken so casually sent another wave of tension through the apartment. Vanessa could almost feel the silence behind the hidden wall hardening. Daniel lowered his voice further. If he trusts you enough to hide here, then he has probably not told you the full situation. Vanessa stared at him carefully. And you will. Daniel's eyes darkened slightly beneath the emergency hallway lights. The people searching for him tonight are not outsiders anymore. He paused briefly before continuing. Someone inside his organization sold information about him. Routes. Security schedules. Private meetings. Vanessa's stomach tightened slowly. Betrayal again. It seemed to follow Adrian everywhere. Why should I believe you? She asked quietly. Daniel looked genuinely saddened by the question. Because if I wanted to hurt Adrian Park, I would not still be standing politely outside your apartment asking permission to enter. Behind the hidden wall, complete silence. Vanessa's thoughts raced painfully fast now. She did not know who to trust anymore. The men earlier had felt dangerous. Daniel felt different. Controlled in another way. Like someone carrying grief beneath professionalism. Thunder rolled again outside while the building remained trapped in darkness. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor shouted angrily about the power outage before a door slammed shut. Life continuing normally while apartment 4B balanced on the edge of something terrifying. Daniel glanced toward the hidden apartment interior once more. Adrian has enemies because fear built his empire, he said softly. But fear also destroys loyalty eventually. Vanessa swallowed hard. Something about those words felt painfully true. She had seen smaller versions of it her entire life. Managers humiliating employees until nobody cared when problems appeared. People surviving under pressure until kindness disappeared completely. Different worlds. Same damage. Then suddenly a voice came quietly from inside the apartment darkness. You always did talk too much, Daniel. Vanessa's breath caught instantly. Daniel froze. Slowly, Adrian stepped out from behind the bookshelf shadows into the faint hallway light spilling through the partially open door. His black shirt remained wrinkled. One sleeve rolled back over the fresh bandage Vanessa wrapped earlier. Exhaustion still shadowed his face, but the softness from the apartment moments before had vanished completely. Adrian Park stood there now exactly as the city imagined him. Cold. Sharp. Untouchable. Daniel's expression changed immediately the moment he saw him. Relief flashed across his face so fast Vanessa almost missed it. Thank God, Daniel breathed quietly. Adrian ignored the words entirely. Who sent you? His voice remained calm, but Vanessa noticed how still the hallway became around it. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly before answering. Min-jae. Adrian's jaw tightened instantly. Not surprise. Confirmation. Vanessa looked between them in confusion. Who is Min-jae? Adrian never took his eyes off Daniel while answering. My cousin. The apartment seemed to grow colder after those words. Rain hammered harder against the windows outside, while the emergency hallway lights flickered weakly overhead. Daniel looked exhausted suddenly, like he had spent hours carrying information too heavy to speak aloud. He controls the downtown operations now, Daniel said carefully. Most of the crews already switched sides before midnight. Adrian's expression never changed, but Vanessa saw something dangerous settle deeper behind his eyes. Not fear. Betrayal finally becoming real. Daniel took one slow breath before speaking again. Adrian, he said quietly. He told everyone you would never survive until sunrise. Silence swallowed the hallway completely after that. Then Adrian looked toward Vanessa for the briefest moment, and somehow that was worse than anger. Because for the first time all night, she saw genuine hurt behind his eyes. Dawn crept slowly across Chicago behind layers of storm clouds, turning the rain outside from black to pale gray. Apartment 4B remained trapped in darkness except for the weak emergency lights glowing faintly through the hallway window beside the door. Vanessa sat quietly at the edge of the mattress with her arms wrapped around herself while Adrian and Daniel stood near the kitchen counter speaking in low voices. The tiny apartment suddenly carried the weight of secrets too large for its peeling walls. Daniel spread a folded city map across the counter beside the microwave, the expensive paper looking strangely out of place next to unpaid utility bills and instant noodle cups. Most of downtown is compromised, he said carefully. The Harbor Club, River North Properties, South Loop warehouses. Min-jae controls all of it now. Adrian studied the map silently, one hand resting against the counter while exhaustion darkened the shadows beneath his eyes. And the police? Daniel gave a humorless smile. Some still loyal. Some pretending to be. Vanessa listened quietly while rain tapped against the windows behind her. She barely understood half the names and locations they discussed, but one thing had become painfully clear. Adrian's world was collapsing faster than even he expected. Daniel glanced toward the apartment door before lowering his voice further. You cannot stay in Chicago much longer. Adrian's expression remained cold. Leaving would make him look legitimate. Staying alive matters more. Adrian looked up sharply after that. The tension between them tightened instantly. Vanessa realized then that these conversations had probably happened many times before in different forms. Daniel trying to protect Adrian. Adrian refusing to bend. Min-jae already announced you disappeared, Daniel continued quietly. By noon, everyone will assume he controls the organization. Adrian folded the map slowly without answering. Vanessa noticed how carefully he hid emotion behind calm movements, but after hours inside apartment 4B, she had started recognizing the cracks beneath the control. The betrayal hurt him far more than he would ever admit aloud. Daniel suddenly looked toward Vanessa. You should leave for work soon. Vanessa blinked in surprise. For a second she had forgotten the Blackstone Grand Hotel still expected her downstairs polishing marble floors, while her apartment hid one of the most hunted men in the city. She looked toward the blinking microwave clock.
5:37 a.m.
I cannot miss another shift, she murmured quietly. Adrian's eyes shifted toward her immediately. You are still going? Vanessa almost laughed at the question. People like me do not get emergency disappearances. Daniel studied her carefully for a moment. Even after tonight? Vanessa stood slowly from the mattress and grabbed her folded uniform from the chair beside the window. Especially after tonight. She moved toward the tiny bathroom to change clothes while the two men fell silent behind her. The cracked mirror above the sink reflected exhaustion she could no longer hide. Her eyes looked swollen from stress and sleeplessness. Her curls refused to cooperate after the humidity from the storm. She looked exactly like what she was. A tired maid from the South Side trying to survive another impossible week. But somehow, knowing Adrian Park sat 10 feet away inside her apartment changed the way she saw herself this morning. She could not explain why. When Vanessa stepped back into the main room wearing the dark hotel uniform, Adrian looked at her differently for a moment. Not pity, respect. The realization unsettled her deeply. Daniel checked his watch before speaking again. The SUVs outside will rotate soon. We have maybe 20 minutes before the next crew arrives. Adrian nodded once. Vanessa grabbed her worn coat from beside the door and reached for her bag. Do not open the door for anyone while I am gone, she said automatically before realizing how absurd the sentence sounded. Daniel almost smiled. Adrian did not. His eyes followed her quietly as she adjusted the strap on her bag. Vanessa, he said softly. She paused near the door and looked back at him. The feared Adrian Park stood beneath weak emergency lighting inside a tiny apartment that smelled faintly like peppermint tea and radiator heat. For the first time since meeting him, his voice carried no control at all when he spoke again. Thank you. Vanessa's grip tightened around the cleaning cart handle as the service elevator doors slid open onto the presidential floor. Thick cream-colored carpet stretched beneath crystal wall sconces and polished gold trim that reflected soft morning light across the hallway. Everything upstairs smelled expensive. Fresh lilies, lemon polish, coffee brewed for people who would never notice the women cleaning around them before sunrise. But Adrian's voice through the phone had already changed the atmosphere around her completely. What do you mean someone from Minjae's crew is here? She whispered carefully while pretending to organize towels on her cart. Daniel recognized one of the men entering through the east lobby 10 minutes ago, Adrian replied calmly. His voice remained low and controlled despite the tension beneath it. They are not here for a hotel room. Vanessa's pulse quickened instantly. How would they know about me? Silence lingered briefly on the line before Adrian answered. Because people close to me have been watching everything. The elevator doors opened farther down the hallway, and two businessmen stepped out laughing softly while adjusting expensive watches beneath tailored coats. Vanessa lowered her voice immediately and pushed the cart forward. I cannot talk right now. Listen carefully, Adrian said quietly. If anyone unusual approaches you, walk away immediately. Vanessa almost laughed at the absurdity of that advice. I clean hotel rooms for a living, Adrian. I cannot exactly disappear. Another silence. Then softer this time, Adrian spoke again. That is exactly what worries me. The line disconnected before Vanessa could answer. She slipped the phone back into her pocket just as Mr. Holloway appeared around the corner near Suite 4102, holding another clipboard against his chest. Brooks, he snapped immediately. Why are you standing still? Vanessa forced herself back into routine instantly. Smile slightly. Lower eyes. Stay invisible. Sorry, sir. Mr. Holloway glanced critically at the cart before sighing in irritation. The Hawthorne family arrives in less than an hour. I want every suite on this floor spotless before then. Vanessa nodded quietly and moved toward the first room assignment. Mr. Holloway stopped her again before she reached the door. And Brooks. She turned carefully. Try not to look so nervous around the guests today, Rich. People can smell desperation. Heat rose painfully into Vanessa's face while he walked away without another word. Nearby, one of the younger housekeeping employees looked at her sympathetically before quickly lowering her eyes again. Nobody challenged people like Mr. Holloway. Not if they needed the paycheck. Vanessa unlocked Suite 4108 and stepped inside the massive luxury room overlooking downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the rainy skyline while soft jazz played quietly through hidden ceiling speakers. The suite alone probably cost more per night than her monthly rent. Vanessa pushed the cleaning cart inside and closed the door behind her with a tired exhale. For the first time all morning, she finally stood alone in silence. She moved automatically through familiar routines. Fresh towels folded perfectly. Bed linens tightened smooth beneath practiced hands. Bathroom counters polished until marble reflected light like glass. Invisible work done by invisible people. But Adrian's warning stayed trapped inside her mind with every passing minute. Someone from Minjae's crew was inside the hotel. Watching. Searching. Suddenly a soft knock sounded at the suite door behind her. Vanessa froze instantly. Too early for room service. Too quiet for housekeeping. Another knock followed. Calm. Patient. Her stomach tightened painfully as she stepped toward the door. Housekeeping. A man's voice called politely from outside. Vanessa stopped breathing for half a second. Housekeeping staff never knocked like that. Slowly, she moved toward the peephole. A man stood outside the suite wearing an expensive charcoal coat instead of a hotel uniform. Calm posture. Hands folded neatly in front of him. Familiar somehow. Then Vanessa recognized him instantly. One of the men from outside apartment 4B earlier that night. The ones pretending to search politely while black SUVs waited in the rain. The man looked directly toward the peephole as if he knew she was there. Then slowly he smiled. Vanessa's heart slammed against her ribs as the slow footsteps behind the service hallway corner moved closer. Mr. Holloway stood directly between her and the elevator, his expression already twisted with irritation beneath the fluorescent ceiling lights. Around them, hotel employees pushed laundry carts past without paying attention, too busy preparing luxury suites for wealthy guests arriving before noon. The smell of bleach and fresh linen filled the narrow hallway, while Vanessa tried desperately to steady her breathing. I asked you a question, Brooks, Mr. Holloway snapped sharply. Why are you wandering around instead of working? Vanessa tightened her grip on the cleaning cart handle. Behind the corner, footsteps again. Calm. Unhurried. Getting closer. Adrian's voice still lingered through the phone pressed silently inside her pocket. Leave now. I was getting extra towels for Suite 4108, she answered quickly. Mr. Holloway glanced toward the nearly full cart and narrowed his eyes immediately. Do I look stupid to you? Vanessa swallowed hard. No, sir. Then stop insulting my intelligence. Another figure appeared briefly at the far end of the hallway behind Mr. Holloway before disappearing again. Vanessa recognized the charcoal coat instantly. The man from outside the hotel suite. He was searching methodically now. Mr. Holloway stepped closer toward her with visible annoyance. Guests are already checking in upstairs while you stand around looking confused. Do you understand how much this hotel charges per night? Vanessa nodded quietly while forcing herself not to look toward the approaching footsteps behind him. Yes, sir. Then maybe start acting like your job matters. The words landed heavily, but this time something inside Vanessa refused to shrink beneath them. Maybe exhaustion had finally burned through fear. Maybe one terrifying night with Adrian Park had changed the way humiliation felt. Either way, she looked directly at Mr. Holloway for the first time in months. My job does matter, she said softly. Mr. Holloway blinked once, surprised by the tone more than the words themselves. Excuse me. Vanessa's pulse raced painfully now, but she kept speaking anyway. I clean rooms people destroy without thinking twice. I work double shifts when others quit. I smile at guests who treat employees like furniture. Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not lower her eyes this time. So yes, my job matters. Silence spread awkwardly through the service hallway. Nearby employees slowed slightly, pretending not to listen. Mr. Holloway stared at her in disbelief, his face tightening with embarrassment and anger. You think attitude changes your position here? He asked coldly. Vanessa opened her mouth to answer, but suddenly another voice interrupted from behind them. Actually, I think she deserves a promotion. Everyone turned instantly. The man in the charcoal coat stood calmly at the end of the hallway now, one hand tucked casually into his pocket. But beside him stood someone else. Danny and Jo. Vanessa froze completely. Mr. Holloway straightened immediately, confusion replacing anger. Sir, this hallway is restricted to staff only. Daniel smiled politely while adjusting the cuff of his expensive coat. Good thing I know the owner. Mr. Holloway's entire posture changed at once. My apologies, sir. I did not realize. Of course you did not, Daniel interrupted gently. His eyes moved toward Vanessa for the briefest moment before returning to Mr. Holloway. But I did hear the way you were speaking to your employee. The hallway fell silent again. Even the nearby laundry cart seemed to stop moving. Mr. Holloway forced an uncomfortable smile. Just standard supervision. Daniel's expression remained perfectly calm. Interesting. He glanced toward Vanessa's name tag. Because from where I was standing, it sounded more like humiliation. Vanessa stared in shock while the man from the charcoal coat remained quietly near the hallway entrance, no longer smiling now that Daniel had appeared. Something dangerous shifted beneath the silence between them. Daniel stepped closer toward Mr. Holloway slowly. "Tell me," he said softly, "how long have you been speaking to people like they are beneath basic respect?" Mr. Holloway's face paled slightly beneath the fluorescent lights. For the first time since Vanessa started working at the Blackstone Grand, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. And somewhere far away inside apartment 4B, the most feared man in Chicago was probably listening to every second through the phone still hidden silently in Vanessa's pocket. Vanessa felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet as Daniel's words settled into the service hallway. There was no going back to invisible anymore. Around them, hotel employees moved quietly between laundry carts and supply shelves, pretending not to notice the tension hanging in the air. But Vanessa noticed everything now. The nervous glances. The silence that always followed power. The way ordinary people learned to disappear whenever danger entered a room wearing expensive shoes. Mr. Holloway cleared his throat awkwardly beside the elevator, desperate to reclaim authority that no longer existed. "Sir, if there is a security concern, perhaps hotel management should be informed." Daniel turned toward him slowly. "And what exactly would you tell them?" Mr. Holloway hesitated. "That certain individuals may be connected to criminal activity." Daniel's expression cooled instantly. Interesting choice of words from someone who humiliates exhausted employees before breakfast. Mr. Holloway fell silent immediately. Vanessa barely heard the rest. Her mind remained trapped on Adrian. He escaped. But now they were all being watched. The realization made her chest feel tight. Daniel stepped closer toward her and lowered his voice. "Listen carefully. You cannot return to your apartment tonight." Vanessa blinked in disbelief. "What?" "Minjay's people already searched the building once. They will keep monitoring it." Daniel glanced briefly toward the hallway entrance before continuing. "Anyone connected to Adrian is now leverage." The word hit her harder than expected. Leverage. Like her life had suddenly become an object powerful men could move around on a table. Vanessa folded her arms tightly over herself. "I am not part of this world." Daniel looked at her carefully. "You opened your door to Adrian Park during the worst night of his life." His voice softened slightly after that. "That makes you part of it whether you want it to be or not." Silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere upstairs, crystal glasses clinked softly from the breakfast lounge while wealthy guests discussed stock markets and private schools over fresh fruit and imported coffee. The contrast suddenly felt unbearable. Vanessa spent years polishing luxury for people who would never notice her name. But now one impossible night had pulled her directly into the center of a collapsing empire. Her phone vibrated softly inside her pocket. "Adrian." Vanessa answered immediately. "Are you okay?" The question escaped before she could stop it. A faint pause came through the line before Adrian answered quietly. "Daniel told you what happened?" Vanessa turned slightly away from the others. "He said you escaped." "Barely." His voice sounded rougher now, more exhausted than before. In the background she heard distant traffic and rain against car windows. "Moving. Hiding again." "Where are you?" she whispered. Adrian stayed silent for a moment too long. "Somewhere temporary." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. She suddenly hated how alone he sounded. Daniel watched her carefully from across the hallway, while Mr. Holloway awkwardly pretended to review paperwork nearby. "You should not call me," Vanessa said softly. "If they are watching people connected to you." "I know." Another pause. Then quieter this time Adrian spoke again. "I just needed to hear your voice." The words stole the air from her chest completely. Not dramatic. Not flirtatious. Just honest in a way powerful men rarely allowed themselves to be. Vanessa looked down at the hotel carpet beneath her shoes while emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her throat. Around her, fluorescent lights buzzed softly above cleaning carts and stacked towels. Ordinary life continued moving through the hallway, while something fragile shifted invisibly between her and Adrian miles away. Daniel finally stepped forward and gently held out his hand for the phone. Vanessa hesitated before giving it to him. "Adrian." Daniel said calmly into the speaker. "We need to move now." Silence answered first. Then Adrian's voice returned colder again, rebuilding the walls around himself piece by piece. "Keep Vanessa away from the apartment." Daniel nodded once. "Already handled." Another pause followed before Adrian spoke one final time. "And Daniel?" "Yes. If anything happens to her because of me." He never finished the sentence. He did not have to. Daniel's expression darkened slightly with understanding. Then the line disconnected. Vanessa stared silently at the phone in Daniel's hand while somewhere deep inside her chest, fear slowly transformed into something far more dangerous. She was starting to care whether Adrian Park survived. The guilt in Adrian's eyes lingered long after Daniel finished speaking. Around them, the diner continued humming with ordinary evening life. Waitresses refilled coffee cups. A family laughed softly near the front windows. Somebody dropped silverware near the kitchen, followed by quick apologies and tired smiles. The world kept moving while Vanessa sat trapped inside a reality she never asked to enter. Adrian slowly lowered himself into the booth across from her, exhaustion carving deeper shadows beneath his eyes. The baseball cap and plain jacket helped him blend in slightly but not completely. Men like Adrian carried power too naturally to ever look ordinary. Daniel slid a folded newspaper across the table toward him. "It is spreading fast," he said quietly. Adrian opened the paper and scanned the front page briefly before tossing it aside with visible disgust. Vanessa glanced down just enough to see the headline mentioning sudden leadership changes tied to several downtown businesses connected to Min Jae. No names, no details, just carefully polished lies wrapped in expensive language. "How much?" Adrian asked calmly. Daniel hesitated. "Enough to make desperate people curious." Vanessa felt cold immediately. She understood desperation better than either man ever could. She saw it every day in exhausted coworkers calculating grocery bills between shifts, in parents choosing medicine or rent, in employees tolerating humiliation because survival cost too much. Adrian leaned back against the diner booth slowly and closed his eyes for a brief moment. The movement looked painfully human. Not dangerous, not powerful, just tired beyond words. "This never should have touched you," he said quietly without looking at Vanessa. She stared at him across the table. "You did not force me to open the door." Adrian finally looked up then. "No," he admitted softly. "That somehow makes it worse." Silence settled between them while rainwater still clung to the diner windows outside. Vanessa studied him carefully beneath the soft yellow lights overhead. The city feared Adrian Park because of his reputation, his wealth, his control. But sitting here now, stripped of penthouses and security teams and expensive silence, he looked like a man discovering too late that power could not protect the people he cared about. Daniel checked his phone again before lowering his voice further. "We still have one advantage." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which is?" Daniel glanced toward Vanessa. "Nobody believes Adrian Park would risk everything for a hotel maid." Vanessa stiffened slightly at the words even though she understood the strategy behind them. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. "Do not talk about her like that." Daniel lifted both hands calmly. "I am explaining why she remains safer than expected." But Adrian's jaw remained tight. Vanessa looked down quietly at the coffee cup between her hands. Hotel maid. The phrase should not have heard anymore. She had heard worse from wealthier people. Yet somehow hearing it here felt different. Adrian noticed immediately. "Vanessa," he said softly. She looked up reluctantly. Adrian held her gaze carefully across the diner table. "Do not let this world reduce you to your job title." The words landed deep inside her chest, because nobody had ever said something like that before. Not in hotels. Not in apartment buildings. Not in years of surviving invisible. Daniel leaned back quietly, watching the exchange with unreadable eyes. Outside, evening lights flickered on across wet Chicago streets while traffic reflected gold and silver across the pavement. Somewhere downtown, Min Jae probably sat inside Adrian's old office believing victory already belonged to him. But here inside a small diner smelling like coffee and rain, something far more dangerous had already begun changing. Vanessa looked at Adrian carefully. "What happens now?" Adrian remained silent for several seconds before answering. Now, he said quietly, I stop running. Daniel's expression tightened immediately. Adrian? He wants me afraid, Adrian interrupted calmly. He wants everyone watching to believe loyalty only survives through fear. Vanessa could hear it in his voice now. Not anger. Decision. Adrian looked toward the rain-streaked diner windows for a long moment before speaking again, softer this time. My mother used to say people reveal who they truly are the moment power disappears. His eyes shifted back toward Vanessa after that. And somehow, the only person who treated me like a human being after everything collapsed was the woman everyone else ignored. Silence settled gently across the booth. Warm. Heavy. Honest. Then Daniel's phone vibrated sharply again against the table. He answered immediately, and within seconds his expression changed. Adrian, he said quietly. Min Jae is holding a press conference tonight at the Harbor Club. Adrian's eyes darkened instantly. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. And he just announced your death. The Harbor Club rooftop glittered above downtown Chicago like a palace built from glass and rain. Camera flashes exploded across the entrance while reporters shouted questions beneath black umbrellas and gold lights reflecting off wet marble. Wealthy investors, politicians, and business executives crowded the rooftop ballroom, expecting to celebrate the official rise of Min Jae Park. Instead, silence swept across the entire building the moment Adrian stepped through the front doors alive. Conversations stopped instantly. Crystal glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the jazz music seemed quieter beneath the weight of disbelief spreading through the room. Adrian walked calmly through the ballroom wearing the same dark jacket from the diner, rain still clinging lightly to his shoulders beneath the chandeliers. For the first time in his life, he entered the Harbor Club without bodyguards surrounding him, without fear protecting his name, without power announcing his arrival before he spoke. And somehow he had never looked stronger. Across the room, Min Jae stood near the stage beneath massive television screens broadcasting financial news and political headlines. The color drained slowly from his face as Adrian approached through the crowd. Nobody moved. Nobody dared interrupt. Years of loyalty, fear, greed, and betrayal suddenly collapsed into one impossible moment beneath gold light and crystal ceilings. Adrian stopped several feet away from his cousin. You announced my death too early, he said calmly. Min Jae forced a tight smile despite the panic flickering behind his eyes. You were supposed to disappear quietly. Adrian glanced around the ballroom slowly. That was the problem with everyone around me. His voice remained steady. Too many people became comfortable believing fear was leadership. Silence deepened across the rooftop. Wealthy men who once trembled beneath Adrian's reputation now watched him with something different. Respect. Because for the first time he no longer looked like a man protecting power. He looked like a man finally telling the truth. Adrian's eyes shifted briefly toward the ballroom windows overlooking the city below. Somewhere beyond those lights sat a tiny apartment with peeling walls and rattling pipes where a woman with nothing had shown him more humanity in one night than most powerful men showed in a lifetime. I built an empire teaching people to survive by fear, Adrian continued quietly. And in the end, the only person who protected me was someone the world barely noticed. The room remained completely still. Min Jae laughed once under his breath, trying desperately to regain control. You are becoming sentimental. Adrian looked back at him calmly. No, his voice lowered slightly after that. I am becoming honest. Outside, rain finally stopped falling over Chicago. The skyline shimmered silver beneath clearing clouds while dawn-colored light began appearing far beyond Lake Michigan. Somewhere in the city, ordinary people started another exhausting shift. Cleaning offices, driving buses, carrying trays through luxury hotels while powerful people rarely learned their names. Adrian suddenly understood how blind he had been for years. Power taught men to look upward constantly. Vanessa taught him to finally look around. Weeks later, the headlines across Chicago changed completely. Financial investigations spread quietly through downtown businesses connected to Min Jae's operation. Several executives disappeared from public life overnight. The Harbor Club eventually reopened under new ownership with fewer politicians smiling near the entrance. But the biggest surprise in the city came months later when Adrian Park vanished from public view entirely. No more rooftop appearances. No more whispered rumors inside luxury lounges. Some claimed he left Chicago forever. Others believed he still watched the city from somewhere hidden. Vanessa never confirmed any of it. By spring, she had opened Brooks Cleaning Services on the South Side using money she earned legally through a private investment quietly transferred with no return address attached. The company hired single mothers, exhausted immigrants, and older workers ignored by luxury hotels. Every employee received health insurance, paid sick days, respect. Above the office desk near the front window sat a framed sunflower mug beside a handwritten note folded carefully beneath glass. Some people save your life without ever raising their voice. On quiet evenings after work, Vanessa sometimes stood beside the office window watching Chicago lights flicker alive beneath the darkening sky and wondered whether Adrian ever found peace after spending so many years surrounded by fear. Maybe he did. Maybe kindness finally reached him too late. Or maybe it arrived at exactly the right moment. Because sometimes the people the world calls powerless are the very ones capable of changing everything. And sometimes opening a tiny apartment door in the middle of the night becomes the beginning of an entirely different life. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share for more unforgettable stories about dignity, courage, and the quiet strength hidden inside ordinary people.